Coming up on Arirang News, South Korea reports another case of the coronavirus, bringing the total here to 16. This woman had recently been to Thailand. The first death reported, meanwhile, in Hong Kong. President Moon Jae-in orders measures to minimize the coronavirus's impact on the Korean economy. Help on the way for the tourism sector, exporters, and companies doing business overseas. And South Korea's consumer prices were up significantly in January, a gain of 1.5% compared to almost zero growth recorded last year. It's 4:00 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. First, We start with the coronavirus outbreak in South Korea. Earlier today, the country confirmed one more new case, which brings the total number to 16. This is the first case reported since Sunday, when there were 3 more cases. With more on that, our Kan Hyung-woo is on the line. Hyung-woo, what's the latest?
Devin, so the Korea Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has confirmed a 16th case of the coronavirus in South Korea. The patient is a 42-year-old Korean woman. She came back to Korea after a trip to Thailand on January 19th. The patient had been getting chills since January 25th before going to Jeonnam National University Hospital in Gwangju yesterday. After testing positive for the coronavirus earlier today, she's been quarantined. The health authorities are trying to figure out where she went and who she's been in contact with.
We're disclosing the movements of the confirmed patients to let the citizens know whether they could have been exposed to the virus, so they can watch their status more closely and quickly take the necessary steps if any symptoms are found.
The Korea Centers for Disease Control and Prevention said the first 15 patients with the virus are all in a stable condition. The health authorities have run infection tests on 607 people with symptoms, and 462 of those tests have come out negative, and those people accordingly have been released from quarantine. The Korean government is also closely watching 1,318 people who have been in contact with the confirmed patients.
All right, Hyung-woo, it sounds like we have strong quarantine measures in place. What else are the authorities doing?
So the Korea Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has approved a faster way to detect the coronavirus. So the current method requires a 24-hour, 2-step process to determine the infection, but the new diagnostic test kit named real-time PCR can find out whether a person has the virus in only 6 hours. It's developed and produced by Seoul-based company Jaein Biotech. Starting Friday, the government plans to provide the new diagnostic test kit in 50 medical institutions across the nation. The Korea Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says it expects the latest measure will strengthen the monitoring ability of local governments. That's all from me for now, but I'll bring you the latest updates in our later newscast.
All right, Kan Hyung-woo, thank you for that. Now, the daily number of deaths reported in China is getting bigger and bigger. With those announced earlier this morning, the total is now more than 420. Also, a person in Hong Kong has died from the virus, only the second death outside of the Chinese mainland. Park Hee-jun has the latest.
The new coronavirus has killed at least 425 people and infected over 20,400 in China as of early Tuesday. According to China's National Health Commission, that's an additional 64 deaths and more than 3,200 infections compared to the previous day, the biggest daily increase since the virus was first detected. It's been 2 months since the first case was confirmed in central China last December, despite the Chinese government declaring war against the outbreak and pouring major resources into trying to contain the situation. The number of deaths has surpassed the SARS outbreak that killed around 350 people in 2003. China has taken drastic measures, including blocking Hubei province from the rest of the world. 50 million people have also been put on lockdown in Chinese cities. But figures continue to increase across the world. In Hong Kong, a 39-year-old patient who recently traveled to Wuhan died from the virus on Tuesday. It also killed a man from the Philippines earlier this week. 16 cases have been reported in South Korea and 20 in Japan. Meanwhile, in the U.S., 11 people have been confirmed to have the coronavirus, with 2 new cases reported in California on Monday local time. Many countries are rushing to evacuate their nationals from Hubei province while enforcing stricter travel regulations to China. And the race to develop a vaccine to stop the spread continues in labs around the world. Park Ki-jun, Arirang News.
The coronavirus is taking a toll on South Korea's economy, but there are concerns that its impact could get much bigger. President Moon Jae-in called today for all-out measures to stop that from happening and stressed that it's the government's job to protect the people. Kim Min-ji reports.
President Moon Jae-in has called on the government to draw up measures to cushion the blow the coronavirus might have on the local economy. Speaking in a cabinet meeting Tuesday, Moon stressed the need to be prepared for the worst, saying it's the government's role to respond to the difficulties of the people and of companies.
사태가 장기화되는 최악의 상황까지 대비하여 우리 경제가 받을 충격과 피해를 최소화하기 위해 다방면으로 대응책 마련을 서둘러야 할 것입니다.
Citing a slump in tourism and domestic consumption, the president ordered the swift implementation of fiscal measures. In particular, he ordered support for local companies operating in China or SMEs within South Korea facing export difficulties. Moon also called for the government to draw up measures for the self-employed and measures to boost the local tourism and service industries. He also pointed out the need to release accurate information regarding the virus, noting fake news could create confusion or concerns.
실제보다 과장된 공포와 불안은 우리 경제를 더욱 어렵게 만들 것입니다. 정부는 가짜 뉴스를 막으면서 감염병 관련 정보를 신속하고 정확하게 제공해야 할 것입니다.
The mayor of Seoul and the governors of Gyeonggi-do province and the two Chungcheong-do provinces joined Tuesday's session as their jurisdictions of infected patients or home to the temporary isolation accommodations for nationals from the virus-hit Chinese city of Wuhan. Pointing out the country's potential to overcome the situation, President Moon said it's essential to coordinate across all ministries and local governments to make sure there are no loopholes in containing the virus. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
China's new ambassador to South Korea, Xing Haiming, has reiterated comments by the World Health Organization that beating the coronavirus does not require widespread travel bans like the kind many countries have put on China. The Chinese ambassador held a press conference in Seoul this morning where he said the WHO declared the outbreak an international public health emergency in order to strengthen global quarantine measures, not because it didn't trust China to contain it. Insisting that China is taking strict measures, he urged other countries to follow the WHO's recommendation. South Korea, for its part, has banned non-Korean travelers from entering the country if they've recently been to China's Hubei province. Xing's press conference was rare for a new ambassador in that he gave it before presenting his credentials to the president. So with the WHO calling on countries not to ban international travel and trade, the head of the organization says he believes the world can beat the virus together. Kim Hyo-sun reports.
Despite the rapid spread of the new coronavirus, the Director General of the WHO has once again urged countries not to close their borders to foreigners traveling from China or to suspend trade. The remark is in line with what he explained last week, as the agency declared a public health emergency of international concern, but did not recommend restricting travel and trade to China.
There is no reason for measures that unnecessarily interfere with international travel and trade. We call on all countries to implement decisions that are evidence-based and consistent. WHO stands ready to provide advice to any country that is considering which measures to take.
Speaking at the opening of the agency's executive board meeting on Monday, the WHO chief said that small number of cases outside China can be managed without countries resorting to extreme measures. He also explained that the disease was mainly declared a global health threat out of concern that countries with weaker health systems would have difficulty in containing the virus, which can spread from person to person. Against this backdrop, an international team of experts led by the WHO could go to China as early as next week to investigate the new coronavirus outbreak. According to Reuters, the team could include American medical experts who will be cooperating closely with Chinese experts upon the agreement with China and the WHO. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the member countries of the G7 have agreed to fight the coronavirus together. The health ministers of those countries held a video conference on Monday in which they agreed to coordinate their approach on travel restrictions, precautions, and research on the virus. They also said they will work with the World Health Organization, the EU, and China. The German health minister, Jens Spahn, said the situation requires international and regional efforts because, in his words, a virus knows neither borders nor nationalities. He's slated to hold a separate meeting with his British and French counterparts on Tuesday. It's a big day not just for Iowa, but for the whole of the United States. The Democratic Party caucuses were held officially on Monday as they look to choose a challenger to President Trump in the 2020 presidential election. The results have not officially come out yet, though. Yoon Jung-min has the details.
The Iowa caucuses officially began on Monday night for the 2020 U.S. presidential election. There are 41 delegates up for grabs at nearly 1,700 caucus locations across Iowa. They also have satellite locations to encourage more voters to join. Iowa only represents 1% of the total of 4,750 delegates at the Democratic National Convention, but it gives much insight about which candidate might actually compete against President Trump at the national level this November. Iowa's outcome depends on many variables. Candidates are eliminated if they don't reach a 15% threshold on the first round of ballots. Supporters of those eliminated candidates may choose a new candidate if they wish. The final candidate is decided after a series of these second-choice votes. On the Republican side, it's almost certain that President Donald Trump will be running for re-election this November. On the Democratic side, however, almost a dozen candidates are running. Among the leading candidates are former Vice President Joe Biden and Senator Bernie Sanders. Other Democratic candidates also include Senator Elizabeth Warren, Mayor Pete Buttigieg of South Bend, Indiana, and former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
There's been a sharp drop in oil consumption in China, and so OPEC is reportedly considering a cut in production of up to 1 million barrels a day. That's according to the Wall Street Journal, which says various scenarios are under consideration, including a cut by all oil-producing countries of an average of 500,000 barrels per day, or just Saudi Arabia temporarily cutting daily production by 1 million barrels. OPEC is set to make its final decision next week in Vienna. Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, Global Strategist at Yuanta Securities. Mr. Yu, thank you for coming on today.
Good afternoon.
So stocks in the U.S. and Europe managed a nice little recovery on Monday despite fears over the coronavirus. What's the story today in the global markets?
Yes, as you said, U.S. market continued to be quite resilient as Dow was up 0.51%, S&P 500 was up 0.73%, and NASDAQ was up actually more than 1%, 1.4%. And quite interestingly, small caps also showed a 1% plus rise. The reason for that is because of the PMI numbers actually recovered to above 50 level. So the U.S. economy seems to be quite resilient. Of course, the coronavirus issues are not actually priced into these numbers, but nevertheless, the U.S. seems to be quite strong. And U.S. earnings, the numbers were coming out that it is actually going in an uptrend, and most of the earnings were revised up in the past week or so. S&P was about 0.36% revised up. NASDAQ was revised up 1.86%. NASDAQ 100 stocks were revised up 2.12%. So clearly, most of the other countries were showing an earnings decline in terms of revisions, but NASDAQ and U.S. are actually showing a rising trend. Also, European market have been successful in terms of the recovery, somewhat. DAX, German index, was up about 0.5%. FTSE, as well as Euro stocks, were up more than 0.5%. Today, the Asian market also recovered quite strongly. KOSPI, after falling over 8% territories from the peak to bottom, it is recovering nicely. Today's KOSPI is up about 1.7%, 1.8%, and KOSDAQ is up 2.2%. And that trend seems to be applied to most of the other countries, including Japan as well as Taiwan, and even China today as recovery is seen.
Some big swings in the Kospi there in the past several days, but oil prices also big swings. They continue to fall, though. They're at their lowest now in over a year. What's your outlook for oil prices?
Well, clearly, if you see the China is the largest importer of oils globally. It is bigger than now U.S. Because of that, when there's a demand drop from China due to all this coronavirus impact, there's a concern about the demand falling and resulting into oil price dropping to the record low level in the last 13 months. It actually broke below 50 level of WTI number, but though today it has recovered nicely, but not big enough that actually at least it recovered to above 50. Because I think that OPEC and oil suppliers are cutting productions. And if that continues, then we think that the price bottom can be reached. However, though, if you look at the oil side, continuation of shale gas innovation resulting into higher supplies, and U.S. percentage of the oil supply is rising. And because of that, we think that the oil price is not going to go up any higher to the significant level as we've seen to around $70 plus in about a few years ago. We think that the oil price should be remain in a range bound. Probably the range have dropped because of the coronavirus. Usually it was range bound between $55 to $65. Now I think it's down to about $50 to $60 range bound over the next few years or so.
All right. Well, back here in Korea, official numbers show consumer inflation is back above 1% for the first time in 13 months. Those figures don't yet reflect any impact from the coronavirus, though. What stands out to you in these numbers, and do you think the recovery in inflation will carry on into next month?
In terms of the recovery, in terms of inflation, I think it might be difficult due to the coronavirus going into the future. If you look at the consumer price, though, it did recover nicely, rising 1.5% year on year in January, after rising 0.7% in the previous month. And it is the highest inflation rate that we've seen in the last 14 months or so. Main reason for that is because cost of transportation rose by 6.2%. Housing and utilities were up about 1.4%. Health-related was up 1.8%. Restaurant and hotels were up 1.2%. And other goods and services were up about 2%. All these were nice, but if you think about what's happening to a lot of these industries because of the coronavirus, I doubt that the prices are rising. We've seen a lot of the closures of restaurants and hotels, even in Korea. It's more severe in China. So because of that trend, the travel by the individuals were dropped by more than 20%. And these things will have implications to the price. Therefore, we think that the central bank is most likely to lower interest rate eventually, because there is much less inflationary pressure, and we need to pump up the economy because of the less consumption that's made by Chinese tourists as well as Korean individuals due to the coronavirus. So we do need ample liquidity injection as well as the fiscal support in order for this disaster to pass smoothly. Hopefully, we'll see some actions made by Bank of Korea as well as the government.
All right, we'll be watching for that, Mr. Yu, but we'll have to leave it there for today. We appreciate your insights.
Thank you very much.
Now, South Korea's consumer inflation last year was just 0.4%, marking the lowest on-year rise since 1965. But as we were just discussing, the latest figures show consumer prices in January were up by the most in over a year. Kim Hae-sung reports.
South Korea's consumer inflation last month was more than 1% for the first time in 13 months. Statistics Korea says consumer prices increased 1.5% on year in January thanks to higher prices of agricultural and industrial goods.
Overall, agriculture, livestock, and fisheries goods prices that showed a falling trend since last July recorded a turnaround and rose 2.5% last month. Agricultural goods prices fell on year starting last August, but vegetable prices increased 15.8% on year due to a fall in harvest.
Livestock prices went up more than 3% thanks to an increase in demand for goods like beef over the Lunar New Year period. Industrial goods prices also increased 2% on the back of higher oil and durable goods prices. Services prices rose 0.8%. Core inflation, which excludes food and energy prices, increased 0.8%. As for whether the coronavirus outbreak could affect the country's consumer prices, Statistics Korea said it's hard to gauge the effect for now. But during the MERS outbreak in 2015, services prices, including sports and leisure, edged down. On the back of a base effect and recovering agricultural goods prices this year, the Finance Ministry and the Bank of Korea have forecast consumer inflation of around 1% in 2020. 김혜성, 아리랑 뉴스.
And now we continue a three-part special on how South Korea has been responding to the export curbs Japan first imposed on it last July. In the second installment, our Ji-young looks at how South Korean companies have been dealing with the situation.
Last July, Japan imposed unprecedented export controls on materials used for the production of chips and displays, namely photoresist, hydrogen fluoride, and fluorinated polyamide. Many were concerned because the export curb could affect local chip and display makers, especially small and medium-sized firms. Korea Federation of Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises distributed a press release in July saying that 6 out of 10 small and medium-sized firms in the semiconductor industry are not likely to last more than 6 months due to Japan's export controls. Despite the concerns, no serious damage was experienced by domestic SMEs, according to an expert.
No major damage was reported because Japan did not expand its curbs on other items and withdrew some of the control already imposed. The Japanese government now understands that the export curbs harm its firms.
Some domestic small and medium-sized firms have succeeded in producing the 3 key materials subject to Japan's export curbs. IT Chem is the first South Korean company that managed to localize 2 of the core ingredients of the colorless and transparent polyamide, or also known as CPI film. Before Japan's export curbs, many large domestic conglomerates that produce CPI films have been purchasing those core ingredients from Japanese firms. However, after the curb, many domestic conglomerates have turned to IT Chem to purchase them.
Due to Japan's export regulations, large display makers started to consider using our products, so it served as a chance for us to enter the market and expand our market share.
According to the expert, local companies like Solbrain and REM Technology have also been developing technologies to produce high-purity hydrogen fluoride and have succeeded in localization. The CEO of another company, Nextin, that succeeded in localization of the equipment that detects defects in semiconductors said, having faith in local companies and giving them opportunities is very important for further localization. Ji-young, Arirang News.
X-rays are a common tool used to look inside the human body, but they do come with a risk of radiation exposure. Now, Korean researchers have developed a technology that can reduce that exposure to less than 50% while allowing high-speed imaging. Park Se-young has more.
X-rays are a common way to view and diagnose medical problems. However, they come with worries about radiation exposure and problems concerning image clarity. Now, Korean researchers have found a way to transform the more than 120-year-old method by developing digital X-rays.
Unlike analog X-rays, it can be quickly turned on and off at the desired time. This reduces any unnecessary exposure, making the image clearer and reducing X-ray exposure.
The researchers use electrical signals instead of conventional electro beams that generate heat. Because electrical signals directly control the electrons being released, X-rays are only released when needed, reducing the radiation exposure to less than half of an analog X-ray. The technology can also capture images more than 10,000 times faster and more accurately than the current X-ray method.
By reforming the analog X-ray source, which depends entirely on imports, this will be an opportunity beyond just localization to take the lead globally.
The technology, published in numerous journals, has been transferred to local firms for commercialization. Park Se-young, Arirang News.
That brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.